All right, how are y'all doing?
Great, how are you?
Very good. So I'm going to kick off if that's okay, and then we'll do some introductions. So first, let's go around. I'll introduce myself first, if I may. I'm your, lead judge or senior judge. My name is Amy Capolanti-Wolf. 2 daughters that went to school here. One's a freshman, so look out for her. She's probably at a party. And the other one just graduated, and she's working for Palm Wonderful over in Santa Monica in brand marketing. I have been a head of HR for many large technology companies. I recently was up in the Bay Area, but I started off my career at PepsiCo, working for Frito-Lay. Then I went to Walt Disney Imagineering, which builds and designs the theme parks. Then moved out here to California. And I've had the pleasure of working for Cisco, Symantec, a large security company, a couple other companies, and now I'm at Dayforce, which is a human capital management platform company that's does payroll, talent. It's kind of like Workday. If you've heard of Workday, we're a competitor to them. And I also sit on a couple of boards, public boards that are on the New York Stock Exchange and the TSX, which is the Canadian Exchange. And I'm really happy to be here and excited for you guys. And I know this team is as well. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lisa Daggett Cummings. I am a born and raised California native. We live in El Segundo. We're close. I have my MBA. I come from a little bit of a different space in that my main career has been in the nonprofit sector. So I too sit on a board, but it's a nonprofit board of directors. And that's it. That's it for me. I'm really excited to meet all of you and excited to hear your presentation.
Thanks, Lisa.
My name is Katie Dominici. I was an alumni of Loyola Marymount in 2005. I started my career at Newell Rubbermaid, so working for the brand that you probably know as Sharpie, and then transitioned into pharma. After that, I did my MBA overseas in Spain and moved straight to New York after, where I started working for Nielsen. You know it as the ratings company, but I was working in a division focused on events and media. So the last 15 years I've spent my time there, working in a variety of capacities, but mostly revenue ownership, mergers and acquisitions. I moved back from New York about 2 years ago, own my own consulting firm now where I have lots of my former employers are now my clients. And congratulations and welcome. We're excited to hear what you have to say.
Hi, my name is Amy Coleman. I don't know if it's meant to be. I picked this this presentation without knowing what's in the details, because I happen to have worked in the aerospace industry for 17 years. Not at Boeing, but at Boeing's several competitors. I used to work at Boeing's competitors, but work closely with Boeing because in the aerospace industry, the big aerospace industry, we collaborate. We're competitors, but we work together, collaborate on the same government contract. So it's really interesting. So I work in the finance, accounting, corporate finance for over 25 years, and in various industries, but the majority of them are in aerospace and defense, and then transition to professional services. And also, I teach part-time. I teach corporate finance part-time at the undergraduate and graduate level. So that's my background. So welcome. I'm so excited to want to hear what this is all about. Wow, welcome, Boeing Board of Directors.
Exactly.
We are.
Exactly, that's right, that's
We're
right.
going for the day.
So I will go ahead and do just a precursor. So in this part of the competition, you're taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. So please make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all 3 counts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you some questions for about between 10 and 15 minutes, and during the Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character. And then after the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside playing the role. So we'll start off with the 25 minutes. Just want to do just a brief introduction of you guys before I hit the 25-minute button.
Sure, we can do a brief introduction, making sure not to say where we're from. but
Exactly, yeah,
I'm Michaela and I am studying marketing.
very good.
I'm a senior.
I'm Ethan. I'm a junior studying finance.
My name is Don Arcangelo. I'm a junior studying public administration.
Excellent, very great degrees and ones that have a lot of connection to this. So with that, I'm going to put on the timer and you may begin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Communication is key. You've probably heard this in regards to your relationships with people, but it also very much applies to your relationships with brands. We trust our brands with our money, our time, and for some brands, our lives. Given the significance, this is why we, Summit Consulting, are interested and excited to present to you, the Boeing Board of Directors, our solution for Boeing's current financial, legal, and ethical struggles in this moment. My name is Michaela Bianco,
My name is Don Arcangelo.
My name is Ethan Ward.
and we're thrilled to be here with you today.
Thank you.
This is our brief agenda of what we'll be covering today. First, we'll start with our analysis, and then we'll go into our recommendation and implementation of that analysis. And then after that, we will discuss our impacts, and we'll also have an appendix following that up with some additional support slides. So first, we performed an executive summary. To get this started, we had to consider what are we looking at. So we needed to first identify the problem and then identify the solution and how it was applicable in all of these different areas. So for that, we started with our analysis, which was specifically in financial, where we realized that Boeing does have a lot of unfulfillment issues at the moment where they can't meet their customers' demands, as well as a consecutive net loss that we'll touch more on, and their brand integrity really being in question. And then moving on to legal, they've definitely seen their fair share of lawsuits, scrutiny, and governance limits. And then regarding ethical, the overall prioritization of profit over safety and security, and then that really brings their integrity into question as well. So from this, we recommend that Boeing use an agentic AI reporting and monitoring system. We'll be explaining this more as we move on, but it will use the current company usages of AI, given that Boeing does implement AI widely across their uses. And then it reports on all areas of the business, from manufacturing, supply chain, fleet management, the whole thing. It also will address these financial, legal, and ethical issues as they are very pertinent to the company's standing at the moment. And from this, we expect to see some impacts, the first being a 1-year payback period, assuming around a 2% improvement in operation efficiency, legal transparency, accountability, and that regulatory compliance that we have lacked in the past at Boeing. And then the stakeholder concern, improving that, given that our stakeholders are, the most important people in the situation, whether it is our passengers, our buyers, our suppliers, and then improving that safety monitoring and quality assurance. So with this, we first wanted to look at where we are sustainably. So I want to point out that as a company, Boeing has made great strides in, being more sustainable. You've actually ranked 18th in terms of your green power usage. So almost half of your electricity comes from green power, which is pretty impressive. Also net zero carbon emissions. However, just given the industry that we're in, there is still so much more work to be done regarding reducing those emissions in any way possible. Specifically, when looking at some of our aircraft, the 737 is actually #1 for percentage of the 2025 projected global emissions in terms of carbon. And then the top 3 are actually 2 Boeing aircrafts and 1 Airbus aircraft when looking at those top 3. And then moving on to some of Boeing's metrics specifically, forecasted to produce over 400 million tons of CO2, as well as some other areas that they can improve sustainably, whether in their water usage or their waste management. So there's lots of opportunities to improve sustainably, and this is where, these are all areas where we believe our solution can be implemented and help. And you're probably wondering, how is this going to look financially, and where is Boeing standing financially right now?
The financial issues with Boeing really started all the way back in 1997 when Boeing acquired #3 competitor McDonnell Douglas. #2 was Airbus. During this merger, McDonnell Douglas management really took over Boeing rather than the other way around. And so this management had a whole different philosophy to running their business. Boeing was a firm known for operational excellence, engineering quality, and innovation, whereas McDonnell Douglas management was really focused on short-term financial gain. And so this created a lot of organizational changes. Most notably, you could see that management moved actually from Seattle to Washington to Chicago, where they distanced themselves from the actual manufacturing of the planes, and this caused disruption and a lack of communication between the actual engineers of Boeing and management. This caused several impacts. First, Boeing's top engineers left the company because they were no longer valued as employees and they were no longer prioritized as the #1 driver of Boeing's engineering excellence. This led to outsourcing, where the majority of Boeing's supply chain was actually outsourced to other companies. And the reason for this is because the McDonnell Douglas management prioritized short-term financial gain. And overall, this led to a decline in quality control because it was so hard to manage several thousands of employers across the supply chain of building several different planes. 20 years later, the impacts of these were seen, and the worst thing that could happen in the aviation industry happened. In October 2018 and March 2019, 2 crashes caused the lives of over 346 passengers. It is difficult to put a price on this loss. However, the fleet itself was grounded for 20 months, leading to a $1.8 billion a month financial impact. In March, at the time of the second crash, there were over 4,600 unfulfilled orders for Boeing 737 MAXs, and this caused an impact of $600 billion, which was more than 7 times yearly revenue. A majority of these orders were delayed or canceled. In addition to this actual impact of the fleet itself, Boeing had to undergo several different fines, compensations, and legal fees totaling more than $20 billion. Next, COVID-19 happened. During COVID-19, more than the total revenue passenger miles were cut in half. And during 2020, a lot of airlines froze demand for new aircraft. In total, the net orders, so new orders minus cancellations and delays, were actually at negative 1,026, meaning that the majority of orders were canceled more than were created in 2020. And so, what were the financial impacts of this? In order to get through these crises, Boeing had to acquire a lot of debt. Boeing had about 20% of their total $54 billion in debt before these incidences. Once the 737 MAX was grounded in 2019, and before COVID, they had to acquire 20% of this debt. After the COVID, they had to acquire another 60%, totaling that $54 billion in debt. This caused Boeing to have to cut dividends, suspend share repurchases, and prioritize debt repayment over shareholder remuneration. This is in line with McDonnell Douglas management and is something that would not benefit the firm long term. Next, this debt accumulation flows over to profitability. And for the last 6 years, Boeing has accumulated a net loss each year. In 2020, they acquired an $11.9 billion loss on operations and $2.2 billion of loss in 2023. Now, let's talk about the legal aspects of the problem.
So we need to ask ourselves, what are the legal impacts in the courts and how does this affect the reputation and the legal stance for the company? So there's certain legal aspects that the company is facing right now and certain challenges that they're facing. So for example, there are certain legal entanglements that are happening within the safety of transportation and regulating the progression of that. But also, as mentioned prior, the 737 MAX crisis has caused much legal outroar within certain settlements in the global stage in action. And then also there's a lot of corporate governance into how the company's going to be running in the future and keeping aware of certain lawsuits and current criticisms that the company is facing, and then also addressing certain legal transgressions and making sure that we stay head-on reforms and making sure that we stay head-on in legal efforts. And so it's important to understand that the oversight of expansion. So Boeing currently follows the ASCAA regulations, and so there's been a lot of scrutiny into how they self-regulate themselves. And so when approaching expansion, we need to understand that there's certain regulations that they have to follow in regards to this. And so there's been a problem with the top to bottom leadership where there's been lack of transparency within the governance. So we need to make sure that there's transparency within the regulators and making sure that things run appropriately, especially under FAA regulations. And then creating a decentralized ideology where the company has faced mass scrutiny within the courts. And so making sure that we follow all the regulations on a global standpoint, especially when working with distributorships within China and international stages, and making sure that we become more of a global entity that follows the regulations. And then also holding accountability within the leadership and making sure that there's been a lot of kind of corruption undertones that have been unaccounted for. And so making sure that that there's discretion in advisory boards, and the advisory boards are being held accountable into the corporate governance. So Boeing has been under fire for many legal things. And so the portions that we want to highlight are the wrongful death settlements, where in the courts, it's been paid out in a total of $500 million in these settlements. And it's a continuing civil lawsuit that is currently still happening in the courts today. And as of now, it's really affected the brand of Boeing. And so, but also within these cases, we have seen, as mentioned prior, these engineers within these companies attempting to become whistleblowers. And so within this, there's been a mistreatment of these whistleblowers. And so as a company, it's very important to understand that that these whistleblowers must have an opportunity to speak their voice, and making sure that there isn't a regulation into how they're being treated. And so in the shareholder settlement, so in the courts, as of now, certain prosecution or the courts are placing shareholders on the plaintiff sides of these of our settlements. So we need to make sure that we understand where shareholders are coming from on a judicial side and judicial lens, and making sure that we're understanding where they're coming from on the governance form. And so making sure that we follow safety oversight. And so the ethical aspects of each problem. So as a company, we have acted in a very unethical manner. And so some key concerns are that we become a profit-driven company and ignoring safety of our consumers, as well as we've focused on slogans and kind of like these false identities, but instead of focusing on the meaningful change. And then we're also moving away from an engineering-led culture that we originally started with and have become more of a corporate control. And so the solution for this is just exhibiting a culture that prioritizes safety and integrity. And so the two examples that we're going to be giving, of course, is the 737 unfortunate MAX crashes, where the ethical dilemmas that I've seen, there's been these deadly crashes that have had legal impacts. And so the harm that has caused is, of course, the lives, but the lives. And so we need to make sure that these settlements are taken in accordance before acknowledging the AI agentic approach, and making sure that on an ethical portion, we are safe and we are set and anchored where we have to approach it. And so these legal actions must become indefensible in the courts, and we must understand our positioning and not approaching it the best. And so, of course, making sure that we also take care of the employees that attempt whistleblowing. So, for example, John Barnett, he was an attempt whistleblower who attempted to speak against the company. And so this is one of the largest court cases that we have seen in attempts to whistleblowing. And so this raises serious ethical problems within the company, that acknowledging where we have gone wrong as a company and making sure that we don't endanger the passengers. And so we want to make sure that we acknowledge whistleblowers in an ethical manner that that we can make sure is indefensible and prevents harm in the future. And so how is this all going to happen?
Let me tell you, let's switch to a more hopeful note, huh? Alrighty, so now getting into our actual recommendation with this agentic AI system. Let's touch on some of the system basics. There's a lot of tech jargon in here, and I want to break it down. So first, what is agentic AI? And this is a a newly emerging form of AI that is different from generative AI, which is sort of what the typical we've been having for the past few years. And the benefits of agentic AI is that it has AI agents, hence the term agentic, that are more autonomous and can support their own decision making and are more, they're more dynamic than the generative AI opportunity. So then moving into that, we have the different types of systems out there. So one that we are specifically looking at for this is the retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, and this can be done agentically. And the reason why this is beneficial is because this AI system is going to be inclusive of all of Boeing's areas, departments, different, many different data sources. And for that, we need agents that are going to be very capable of going out and retrieving that information depending on what the need is for that. So that's sort of the purpose of retrieval augmented generation. It has more factual grounding and dynamic reasoning, and it understands more so of what information to go get instead of just hallucinating, which has been a problem with generative AI. So we want to avoid that. And then moving into this is touching on sort of the ethical transparency aspect of it. How are we going to maintain AI in an ethical manner has been a problem for lots of companies. And with that, there's the open source opportunity, which is essentially where we have the transparent and accountable aspect, where we are basically publishing as much of the system as we legally and safely can. So essentially the frameworks, the parameters, the coding of the reporting system itself, because the reporting system is not the confidential, it's what it's reporting on. And then that reported data, the source data will be kept confidential, obviously, as needed. So that's sort of a snapshot at the system basics, and now I'll be touching on three main aspects of the system to help you visualize it. So the first one is going to be an interactive reporting dashboard. This is important to essentially have a home for the data, and it is going to be a platform where different stakeholders can come and look and seek out the data and information that they're looking to find. So there will actually be different security measures depending on the stakeholder that you are, and we have additional slides on that if interested, but to ensure that, if passengers want to go and access this dashboard, they can, versus if United Airlines wants to go and access it, they have a different access level, essentially, than those passengers. And then moving into why it's a live reporting database, and this is essentially sort of the heart of the operation, ensuring that ultimate transparency and honesty, since this is an issue where Boeing has really struggled. And then moving into some examples of what could possibly be on there, I could see, especially me as a passenger, enjoying like a live historical flight map, seeing sort of that Boeing legacy, seeing the hundreds of thousands of flights delivered safely in the process, as well as the manufacturing progress tracking. So an issue that we've had is that lack of order fulfillment. So at least if we can keep United Airlines or Southwest Airlines better in the loop on where that manufacturing process is in one space, that's an opportunity for them to be more informed. And then as well as the supply chain log, Boeing has had issues in the past where it's difficult to trace quality or a lack thereof because it's not documented properly. So just having a log where it says this was completed at this time at this station or from the supplier definitely increases the opportunity for cross comparison and sort of recognizing errors easier and noticing sort of where our weak spots are. And then moving on to the AI agent integration, I like to think of these as the little robots sort of powering the system and making the decisions. So we have in the cloud, which is essentially in the digital cloud, no pun intended, and that can be on the digital twin simulation. Boeing actually uses it in their Boeing Analytics. And then on the edge is the more physical, on the machinery, on the aircraft idea. And then you also have the hybrid option, which essentially utilizes both. So low latency decisions are made on the edge, and then complex analytics sent to the cloud. And now going to the reporting and compliance, this is our last sort of aspect of the program. This is essentially beneficial to ensure compliance with regulatory standards, as that is something that has been an issue in the past, and ensuring that that information can be compared and pulled in one holistic place, as well as providing transparent AI-generated reports for those different stakeholders, depending on who they are. And then the great opportunity for ESG reporting and compliance with the EPA, all of those regulatory goals and requirements that we have to hit, and seeing and tracking where we are on those. And then moving into some implementation and impacts of this system. So regarding operational synergy and sort of the benefits of it, regarding the different areas, there's fleet management and supply chain, where we can track those supply chain providers and sort of where what they're supplying is going, and sort of where the end result is, as that's been an issue in the past. And then manufacturing, the detailed catalog of fulfilled parts and seeing where our manufacturing is succeeding or not succeeding. We've also seen issues in the past with, there's a lack of talent following the pandemic. And with that, there might be more human error on the line, and theoretically the system should pick up on that afterwards, and in the past it has not. So this is an option to remedy that. And then public relations and sales, an issue where Boeing has lacked. This is ultimately just as visible and accessible as we possibly can be, and it provides up-to-date demand management from the sales aspect. And then ESG accountability, as I was saying, regarding those ESG goals, keeping them tracked and keeping them published. And then regarding our goal alignment, while this can touch on multiple goals in industries, we found that it most aligned with number 9, building resilient infrastructure, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation. So some different ways that we sort of do that, but it essentially all ties back to that cross-functionality. Also, a benefit of being open source is that this can also serve as a role model for other businesses and really just provide that education and growth aspect to these needs for our company, but also others. And now you're probably wondering, how is this going to look financially for Boeing? Ethan can tell you.
All right, so throughout the case, we've thrown out several numbers, but I'd like to reiterate them here because really the cost of an action for Boeing is greater than the cost of implementing this solution. Continue to operate the way that Boeing does will not yield results. And so there's something that we must be doing. First of all, as mentioned before, the 737 MAX groundings cost $21 billion a year for the company. And to get through COVID and the 737 MAX crisis, they had to take on additional debt, really weakening the balance sheet. And then, as Don mentioned, of course, there were over $3.3 billion in legal settlements over the course of the last decade. Now let's talk about financial implications of our solution. The first being that this AI reporting dashboard and monitoring system would increase operating efficiency. In finance, one thing that I'm learning is that the best way to measure operational efficiency is operating margin. And so this solution would increase Boeing's operating margin from 3.2% to 5.1%. Next, the actual financials of the investment. It would be around a $500 million investment, which would be increased capital expenditures for the first year from 1.8 to 2.7% of revenue. This is almost a 50% increase, which is a substantial investment, but the payoffs are worth it. Boeing already has a partnership on many of its AI applications with Microsoft. So Boeing is already working with Microsoft on different areas of data, but they have not integrated all of these separate departments and systems into one comprehensive unit. That is what we would be recommending. And this model would be consumption-based pricing from Microsoft. So once this initial investment is made, there will be the operational costs associated with it, but yes. Now let's talk about legal implications.
Thank you, Ethan. So the legal implications of this is ranges within a variety of different ways. So we want to make sure that we're doing this in a lawful way, where this AI system aligns with the government protocols, with the government changing and certain regulations occurring. We want to make sure we're up to date in a beneficial way that affects us positively in a company. And then also we want to make sure that we create safeguard and manage these risks of this AI system and making sure that we're not breaking any laws in accordance that we've done in the past. And then sustainably, we want to focus, of course, on the short term, but we want to make sure that this agentic AI is something that we can be using in the future in a legal standpoint and following certain procedures. And then on the ethical implication side of this agentic AI, we also want to make sure that we hold the social responsibility and making sure that we care for the well-being of our consumers. And so we promote safety, but also make sure to protect the lives as seen, unfortunately, in the 737 MAX incident, but also making sure that this is feasible, making sure that this is very fair and very transparent, as we have seen in the past that hasn't happened, unfortunately. And sustainability, we want to make sure, of course, referencing back to the Sustainable Development Goals number 9, and making sure that we continue to innovate and we continue to make a difference in our advancement, but also making sure that it continues to become resilient. And so, with that being said, we would like to open up the panel for questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. That was excellent. Really appreciate the thought you put into this.